So Joe Biden is set to pardon his son Hunter for a lot of different things. Now, Hunter went to jail. He pleaded guilty to 9 federal tax charges and was convicted of 3 felony charges for lying to the federal government on a firearms application. A lot of people have a lot to say about this for one reason or another, but this isn't the first time a president has pardoned a family member for something that they've done. First of all, the president's allowed to pardon anyone he wants as long as it's for a federal crime. The president is also allowed to offer clemency, commute your sentence, or to get rid of all fines, penalties, and reprieves that have been handed down in trial, as long as it was a federal trial. Another thing that I didn't know is that you don't have to accept a pardon. A president could be like, you're off scot-free, and you could be like, no, I want to stay in jail. What I did was horrible. The only federal crime a president can't pardon is impeachment. The cool thing about this is there's a step-by-step process on how to do it on the internet. Federal pardon petitions are addressed to the president, who grants and denies the request. Typically, applications for pardons are referred for review and non-binding recommendation by the Office of the Party Attorney, an official of the United States Department of Justice. The number of pardons and reprieves granted has varied from administration to administration. Fewer pardons have been granted since World War II. Federal pardon can even be issued prior to you going to trial. You can be in the middle of a trial and a president can be like, you know what, pardon, and the trial is just done. It ends right there. Now, the Department of Justice does normally require anyone that's filing a petition for a pardon to wait 5 years after conviction or release prior to receiving a pardon. But of course, that's subject to whoever is in office at the time. For clemency, you don't even have to file a formal request. If your case tugs at the heartstrings enough of a president, he can be like, you know what, I like this guy. We're done here. Again, it's subject to the administration at the time. Now, some administrations do require that you wait a certain amount of time before you get clemency. They also want you to show that you can lead a responsible life, a responsible and productive life. Now, we have had people that have tried to self-pardon. During Watergate, the Watergate scandal, Richard Nixon's lawyers suggested that he issue a self-pardon. But the Office of Legal Counsel issued an opinion that concluded that a president may not self-pardon. Remember when I said that a minute ago? That's why. Of course, there's loopholes around it. The 25th Amendment is one of them. Under the 25th Amendment of the United States Constitution, the president could declare himself unable to perform his duties and could appoint the vice president as acting president. The acting president, which would be the vice president, could then issue a pardon the president, and all charges or any kind of whatever would just go away. Of course, this is a problem in and of itself. A president could do something egregious, leave office, his vice president take over, and then issue him a complete pardon. That's problematic in my personal view. And I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican, you shouldn't be able to wheel and deal your way out of problems, maybe. I don't know. It also puts in perspective what a lot of people say about politicians, that they feel that they're above the law. And also, I feel like America is moving further and further into a situation where politicians are above the law unless they do something like ending someone's life or something like that. And even then, there's like a gray line on what people are willing to prosecute a sitting president for. I mean, we really had a president that tried to overthrow an election in 2020 and still face no consequences. Shows money talks and bullshit walks. There has always been a ton of controversy surrounding pardons, especially back in the day during the 1800s for the whole slavery thing. And not only that, even before that, after the Revolutionary War, people that had come from England and had taken part in the Revolutionary War and were loyal to the United States remembered how the royals abused the pardon power. And they warned how people would abuse it here in the United States if it was too far-reaching. George Washington, of course, was the first president, and he was the first person to grant a high-profile pardon. It was for the leaders of the Whiskey Rebellion. The Whiskey Rebellion was a violent tax protest in the United States beginning in 1791 and ending in 1794. During the presidency of George Washington, the whiskey tax was the first tax imposed on domestic products by the newly formed federal government, and the tax became law in 1791. and it was intended to generate revenue to pay the war debt during the Revolutionary War. Farmers of the Western Front were accustomed to distilling their surplus rye, barley, wheat, corn, and fermented grains to make whiskey, and these farmers resisted the tax. Because they resisted, they would find tax collectors and tar and feather them. A lot of people, George Washington himself said, hey, we should do this nonviolently, and they were like, no, fuck that. We want our money. Eventually, the government was like, hey, you guys that are not paying your taxes are going to go to jail. And it got even bigger. They had a huge all-out insurrection. But regardless of all that, George Washington pardoned the leaders of the Whiskey Rebellion. Fast forward to the Civil War. We have another president, Andrew Johnson, who commuted and pardoned thousands of former Confederate officials and military personnel during the Civil War. Actually even made them take an oath once he pardoned them, saying that they solemnly swear, well, you know what? Let me just read the oath. I, underscored name, do solemnly swear to affirm in the presence of Almighty God that I henceforth faithfully support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Union of the United States thereunder, and that I will, in like manner, abide by the faithful support of all laws and proclamations which have been made during the existing rebellion with reference to the emancipation of slaves, so help me God. Basically, I promise to be a good boy. Please don't throw me in jail. I think whatever you're doing is cool. Just don't throw me in jail. The people who had to take this pledge were people who had property value that was less than $20,000, which was the equivalent of $400,000 in 1800s. Basically, it was the people who didn't have the money and couldn't leave the country, because we know that most Confederate people, well, not most, a lot of them, the ones that had money, a lot of it, and a lot of slaves ended up leaving the country, whether they went to Mexico, Canada, Brazil. There's a huge Confederate thing out in Brazil for some reason, or wherever they went, somewhere in South America usually. It's like Andrew Johnson being like, hey, let's just be cool now, okay? Come on. But in America, we've had some really interesting pardons, like, for example, Richard Nixon. Under the Watergate scandal, Richard Nixon resigned before he was able to be impeached, but he was also facing some really serious charges. He resigned, and Gerald Ford took over. One of the first acts Gerald Ford did was a presidential proclamation saying that he granted full and unconditional pardon to Richard Nixon, his predecessor, for any crimes that he might have committed against the United States as president. In particular, the pardon covered Nixon's actions during the Watergate scandal, before and after. Gerald Ford said that the pardon was in the best interest of the country. And Nixon's family situation was a tragedy in which we all have played a part. Ford also said that Richard Nixon's family situation was a tragedy. I mean, let's be for real. We all go through things, and sometimes we have bad family situations, but that shouldn't be a litmus test for consequences. Jimmy Carter pardoned over 200,000 people. Actually, it was a whole group of people. During the Vietnam War, those who didn't want to go, who burned their draft cards or left the country, were considered draft dodgers. And Jimmy Carter pardoned all of them. It was called Proclamation 4483. Carter issued this pardon proclamation, to grant pardon for violators of the Selective Service Act to those which evaded the draft between August 1964 and March 1973. Pardon restored their full political, civil, and other rights that they had lost due to being draft dodgers. Now, of course, Jimmy Carter had a very strong stance against war. He was essentially what a lot of people think was like a pacifist in every sense of the word. A lot of people believe that Jimmy Carter knew what was happening would cost him politically and he would possibly lose the election, but he thought it was ethically important to do that. He didn't think a whole generation of people should be punished because they didn't want to go to war and die. Jimmy Carter also pardoned a bunch of Puerto Rican nationalists. In the 1950s, a bunch of Puerto Ricans went into the Capitol building in DC and opened fire, ended up taking the life of a police officer, I believe. And Jimmy Carter actually gave them full pardons. Now, a couple of them were actually eligible for parole already, but they didn't apply because of their political beliefs. President Jimmy Carter had based his decision on a favorable recommendation from the Attorney General to commute the sentences of the individuals for the time that they served. The Attorney General's office wrote a letter and basically cited that as the reason why they should be pardoned. Always find it interesting how back in the day, it seemed like sentences were so much shorter than they are now. People opened fire on literal congressmen, and they were given time, significant time in jail, but they had the opportunity to get out. If that happened today, you would never see the light of day again. And also, the dude who tried to end the life of Ronald Reagan is out of prison. He tried to take the life of a sitting president, and he's out. He's a painter. He's a thriving artist, whatever. But he's out of jail. He's no longer in prison, which I find wild, because today you would never see the light of day for that. Anyway, we have Ronald Reagan, who really, I wouldn't say he had some questionable pardons, but his pardons seemed kind of like lame, Like, for example, he pardoned Mark Felt and Edward S. Miller. They were pardoned in 1981 for authorizing illegal break-ins by the FBI agents in the early 1970s during Watergate. Felt also later admitted to being Deep Throat and an informant in the Watergate scandal. He pardoned Marvin Mandel. He granted him clemency in 1981 for mail fraud and racketeering. His conviction was later overturned by the U.S. District Court. Here we get down to the family things here, because in the 90s and the early 2000s, Bill Clinton pardoned his brother. And no one ever talks about it. My battery's going dead, so I have it hooked up to the charger. No one ever talks about Bill Clinton's pardoning of his brother. Roger Clinton was Bill Clinton's brother. He had a very bad drug problem, sort of like Hunter Biden. He really liked cocaine, and not only did he like doing cocaine, he liked selling it. So in 1985, he got caught up in a drug bust, right? A huge sting that involved federal agents and all sorts of things there. And he was arrested and he did time in jail. Now, this was around the time where Bill Clinton was entertaining the idea of running for president, right? And the Secret Service gave him a nickname. They gave Roger Clinton a nickname, and that was Headache. In the early 2000s, Bill Clinton ended up pardoning his brother. And that was after he served his entire sentence and was out of jail for well over a decade. But Bill Clinton ended up pardoning him, so it didn't stick on his record and like be an eyesore to everyone else. Then we fast forward to a more recent president. That's Donald Trump. Donald Trump pardoned his in-laws. Charles Kushner, he was a developer in New Jersey, and Donald Trump pardoned him. Trump pardoned him in 2020 after Kushner had pled guilty to tax evasion and making illegal campaign donations. So Joe Biden pardoning his son is rather tame compared to all the other presidents that have pardoned much worse human beings. Hunter had a drug problem, and because he had a drug problem, he made bad decisions. And because he made those bad decisions, he had consequences that came to him. But his dad, having the power to change the trajectory of his life at 54 years old, did it. And he was well within his right to do it. And it's a historic precedent of presidents doing just that. Pardoning family members who do bad things. Also pardoning friends who do bad things. But to let someone that had an addiction, who's made amends, who's been clean for 5 years, sit in jail, personally, I don't think it's really fair. And all the crimes that Hunter did were towards himself, not towards anyone else. So with that being said, I don't think it's that big of a deal that Joe Biden pardoned his son. That's my personal opinion. And I think we should just all move on, Anyway, my name is Anthony Milian, and I hope you learned something new today. Don't forget to subscribe, to follow. And then also, if you want to buy some merch like this hat right here, I have the merch in the description below. And it's really just a way to support the program and the things that I have going on here. So hope you guys have a wonderful day. And again, make learning cool again. And I hope you learned something new today.